Alright everyone, welcome to this chat. So, what do I mean by lifetime energy, right? Lifetime energy is the title. It depends on what your current practice of consciousness is, right? So, on one hand, you can look at it as my lifetime, right? My entire lifespan and energy that I'm spending. One hand, you can look at this is time an actual thing, and how do I apply my energy in my life in this concept of time? So again, I want this talk to be more of a discussion. So please, if you're watching this, I want you to type in and interact with me. I don't want this to be like my typical Facebook Live where I'm just like, giving information, right? Ideally, this is a discussion because I don't proclaim to know what really time is. Does anyone actually know what time really is? Right, so feel free to interact. I will say that there's some very simple practices and concepts that we could apply that through this practice actually reveals what time may mean for each of us. Does that make sense? Right, so I will talk about what's the practice that you can apply that then reveals the thing for you, right? Because if you've seen any of my previous content or heard previous content, I talk about the hologram, right? And so essentially two light sources at opposite ends, get my reverse Facebook video thing in order, opposite ends. And then when the two light sources light up, the intersection is this hologram. And I believe that one of our gifts in life is to be the bearer, the shower, the revealer of the hologram by shining the light in these opposite ends, reveal the hologram, and then we get to embody it, right? We put it into us, and that shines into the world, right? Or if you want to be very left-brained about it, you talk about it, right? So if that's all very nebulous, I'll give you a concrete example. So if you, right, the easiest example I use is if you experience your hand in really hot water and your hand in really cold water. By doing that, you have this discernment of temperature differences. And as you keep doing that, you would start to embody, understand, and know the concept called temperature, right? And so now once you understand temperature, wow, that really starts to birth things. How do you control temperature? How do you experience temperature different ways in different rooms and all that stuff? And that came from experiencing hot and cold, right? And so how do we take that concept and apply it to life in a way that reveals what energy and what time is, right? That's essentially the discussion. And so again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to chime in. First, I check audio. Can anyone hear me? If you can hear me well, just let me know because I'm actually using this. I want to make sure that it's actually working, right? And so just check my things, make sure I can see perfect, just so I can see the messages that's coming on my phone. Right, so feel free to chime in. And let's just jump right into it. What is like energy, life, and how do we apply this? Well, first we'll talk about one tactical practice. And this tactical practice is what are our goals, right? This is a very left brain common process. And I'll apply to health since, sort of in that niche. If you think about it, most people will apply an intention of I want to be healthy, or I want to lose weight, or I want to get rid of my diabetes, right? My experience of blood sugar issues. I want to get rid of my current experience of having higher blood pressure. I want to get rid of my fatigue, my brain fog, so on and so forth, right? And so those are some intentions. And what's very interesting is once you set the intention, then you work backwards. You go, okay, what's the how, right? What's the process? And for example, let's say if we use good old weight loss, I want to lose 10 pounds, and you work backwards. You go, okay, that involves some nutrition changes, also known as diet. Well, I'm not a big fan of that word. We'll say nutrition changes, and then we'll say it involves some exercise, right? I'm going to burn some calories. And then you work even under that, which is, okay, what are my calories that I'm eating, and so on and so forth, the sugars, the carbs, and proteins, the paleo, the keto. And under burning calories, it's like, all right, how often am I going to the gym, and what am I going to do in the gym. And then underneath of that now is like, how often am I going to the gym? How long is the session? Right? How big are my meals? So you can see sort of that very typical way of thinking and a typical process that a left brain person would use to create the path of losing the 10 pounds. Right? I'm going to present a different path and a different reality. Right? Because that path, right, does help the person and supports the person in understanding boxes, right? Everything was a box. 30 minutes of this, I'm doing this box of movements in the box called the gym, interestingly. In the box of burning calories, and tied to the calories is my food, which has a box of protein, carbs, and fats, which has a box of this many protein, this many carbs, or this many carbs, this many fat. Right, and under the box of when am I eating these foods, right? The time there's just a bunch of boxes, right? And so that gives you structure in your life, and you get to practice structure, which is very helpful, right? On the flip side to it, what if we created an entirely different process, right? What if already from the beginning, the language, instead of I want to lose 10 pounds, the intention is, how do I become the person who is 10 pounds lighter? Right? This might sound like the same, right? And so I'll use actual numbers. If someone's 200 pounds, they want to get to 190. They go, I want to lose 10 pounds. How do I lose 10 pounds? Already from the language perspective, to be a person who is 190 pounds, that is a very different energy, right? A different intention than losing 10 pounds. Right? And already we can extrapolate the impact of the language choice in the application of energy. Right? Remember, this is the metaphor. This is about application of energy and time. And so the person who says, I want to lose 10 pounds and goes in boxes for the proteins, the carbs, and the fats, and nutrition, and the workouts, and when, and all that stuff, when they get there, that practice in that tool is how they got there. And so it makes sense that typically they would stick with that practice, right? In other words, they continue to go to the gym. And they will continue to use mental energy to say, I'm going to work out consistently. I got to make sure I go to the gym. I want to use my dedication, my willpower, all that stuff, energy to make sure I get this much gym stuff in. And also, I'm going to use a lot of energy and dedication and willpower to make sure I eat this way, right? That. Whereas on this side, if you set the intention of I'm going to become the person who weighs 190, what happens? Well, when you become that person, does it require constant additional energy to do those actions? Maybe not, right? Because you become that person, right? It doesn't take additional energy if you're Bob and you're listening to this to essentially be Bob. It's not like every day you wake up and say, okay, to be Bob, I need to do this, and I need to do that, and I need to do this. You're just being, right? Part of your being does produce actions, but it doesn't take mental energy just to manage the process of being, right? Because it's a being. And so already from the very high level frame, the way you set your intentions and the word that you use, the phrase that you put together, right? Every word that you spell in the phrase is a spell. You're spell casting. You're casting the spell. You're casting the code into this game, right? You're a player in this game. And the words that you're speaking is like adding in the source code, changing the game. And so the source code that you use to say, let me lose 10 pounds, is a very different source code than let me become the person who weighs instead of 190. Right? Hopefully this makes sense. If this is making sense, let me know. If it's not, just comment and I will offer more examples and clarification. Right? Because again, this type of approach isn't being discussed. What's typically discussed is the downstream stuff. What do I do? Right? But keep in mind that the doing is already governed by the top end intention in the wording. Right? So essentially, when the meta of this, if I go one layer up, essentially, is if we set an intention of doing, losing 10 pounds, right? The doing stuff. In my mind, it requires constant energy to run that machine, right? It's like building cogwheels, and you're constantly cranking that machine to make it run. Whereas if you're setting becoming or unbecoming, right, completely just shifting who you are essentially, once you're there, it doesn't require constant energy and input, right? Because you're just being at that person, right? That is your energy state, right? And so that already reveals, just by changing our wording and our intention, one requires constant energy. It's like a ball you'll probably juggle for the rest of your life. And many of you have experienced this when you've been on that side, right? Which is doing X to achieve X weight or X health. It requires typically constant attention onto it. And you know what happens, right? At some point you get attention fatigue, also known as the loss of willpower. Then you, quote unquote, language, I fell off the train, right? A train is something you get on, no one stays on it, no one lives on a train, right? Already those are words that are temporary, requiring constant energy to stay on, because the overall starting phrase governs your entire language and reality downstream. And so it requires constant energy, right, to be there, right, to do all that. Whereas on this side, becoming or unbecoming and shifting and being that person requires, to get there, it might be the same amount of energy, but once you're there, this requires energy to manage. This doesn't require energy anymore, right, because you're being that person. That makes sense, right? And so, right, I'll give you another example, right? If you're told, hey, do acts of kindness, and every day you're like, okay, let me make sure I do my act of kindness. Let me make sure I do my act of kindness. Or we can say gratitude journal every day. Let me gratitude journal. Let me gratitude journal. Let me gratitude journal. Everyday journal. On this side, you can just say, set a different intention. Let me become a person and be a person of gratitude. Right? Again, both might take 90 days of gratitude journaling every morning, but this suggests you got to keep gratitude journaling for the rest of your life. Being the person of gratitude, once you're there, it's a part of you, right? You don't require additional energy because it's a part of you, right? And so it's like doing acts of kindness may require constant thinking, okay, what's the act of kindness I'm going to do today? Whereas becoming a kind person, it is literally a part of you. Your being is kindness. And so this is a powerful concept that I myself has practiced in the last 5 or 6 years in realizing, what's the high-level wording and wordsmithing can we apply to our lives? So we're not constantly expending energy, right? Because this chi energy, life force, attention, electromagnetic energy, light, so many names for it. At some point when this runs out, you're no longer here. I'm not suggesting not being in your physical form is a bad thing. I actually see it as a favorable thing. However, your ability to create and receive does depend on this energy, right? This energy that you want to be kind of mindful of and pay attention to. And so I'm a huge fan of that's the case, and how do we just wordsmith our lives to become, unbecome, and be versus constantly do, right? Why is this important? Well, just think. In quantum mechanics, in the spiritual world, time has been described as non-existing, right? In quantum mechanics, there is no time, there is no future and past, right? One way to look at it is just variations of the moment and experiencing the moment, and all infinite possibilities are happening. And so you think about, well, if that's the case, what controls our experience? Right? How do we jump from one reality to another? Another way to word this, how do we manifest the reality that we want to experience? Right? It's the energy, right? Our ability to weave, right? This energy is the tool and the path of doing that, right? And so how this works, in my mind, is the volume of energy that we have is influenced by our wording that we use and the energy that we're expending. Of course, you can always gather and build this energy. That might be a whole different discussion. And in our physical space, how we tune that energy into a frequency and then we amplify it, of course, I'm sure many of you who are watching this know this, is essentially connecting your head to your heart, right? So electrical, magnetic, electromagnetic, boom, lots of energy. And you crank that with all this life force, this energy that you have stored in you, because it's not being wasted on all this subconscious programming attention, right? Now, if that's all too nebulous, I'll give you a very easy to understand concrete example, right? If your browser, right, if you're running like 500 tabs that's open, your computer is going to have a hard time processing the tab that you're on and doing stuff, right? Because it's still, even though you're not looking at the other 499 tabs, your computer is using resources to run those other 499 tabs, right? Imagine how fast your computer could run where for years you've been running with 499 tabs open and you chunk it down to 100. Even better, you chunk it down to what? That's what this is essentially, using a computer analogy, right? It's being very careful. How do you close those tabs? Well, you get to reframe some of your intentions in your life from a let me do that to become and be the person that is that. Okay, so that's the big takeaway, right? Because ultimately that saves you and collects and reserves and cultivates and makes it much easier, right, to use your energy, and you have that energy to amplify your intentions across time, right? Really just different realities, and then you can then manifest, right? And so a lot of people there's different schools of thought. Some people believe you just get in a vortex and all this happens. Having experienced that practice, I believe if you're in the vortex, if you're in that vibration, but yet your energy is very, 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 very low because you have all this subconscious programming, it's blocking you from getting into that vortex, right? When you have 499 tabs open, your subconscious is running a lot of stuff, right? And so the process of letting that go is setting different intentions and just being that person. Now, there are some tabs, right? Just to expand upon this concept, there's some tabs you're like, oh my god, I really don't want to do that. I don't know, maybe it's like your taxes or I don't know, some action that you don't enjoy doing, so you don't even look at it, right? So you just kind of put it off, and you just like table it, but it's still running. It's constantly running that program, taking up a lot of energy, a lot of bandwidth. And so in the psych world, they would call this stuff, trauma, right? Oh, you had some type of trauma, and somehow you got to get from that trauma. You got to deal with the trauma. All this language literally is enslaving us in that vibration, right? Because ultimately, what is the goal of the process? Well, and I've spoken about this so many times in so many content pieces, which is you want to take that experience from the past and you want to find some way where it serves you, right? You transmutate it. And so ultimately, it's much easier to transmute, right, and transmutate that energy if you start off by naming it something that's neutral, which ultimately it's just a thing that happened where you had a heightened emotional response to it, right? Someone stabs me in the arm. The act of it is knife went into my arm. Right? That's now to make it a story. Someone stabbed me. That's already partial story. To anchor that to an emotion is that was trauma. Right? But ultimately, knife went in arm. And so ultimately, if we start off with knife went in arm, it's much easier to reframe and craft the story of knife went in arm and how that was useful for me versus I was stabbed. That's a little bit more difficult versus that was trauma. That's much more difficult to now bring into a energy that is serving, right? So there's something to be mindful of in terms of our language use. How are we assigning the energy in the story to our previous experiences? Right? So then that allows us to free up all this amazing energy then to, we'll call it manifest, I'll just use mainstream terms, to manifest across time. Right? And so hopefully that content made sense. If there's any questions, I know some of that was somewhat meta, but as woo as this sounds, just know that there's science starting to support this. It's starting to be measurable, right? If you don't know, there's science showing that 90% of our DNA broadcasts light. Like we're literally projecting photons out into the universe, into other people, And those photons carry a wave, and that wave carries the data, just like Wi-Fi waves. And so our every thought, our every emotion then influences the frequency of light that we're broadcasting out. Right? And so there's now cameras from Russians, right, who can, high voltage cameras that can capture this and measure this now. Right? And so all the woo stuff, they just like, oh, you know, your emotions and your thoughts and all that stuff, yeah, we can start to measure this, right? And so if you're watching this and you're like, wow, this sounds or looks so out there, know that we're starting to have the science to measure and quantify, right? And this is the perfect intersection of sacred and science coming together in our lifetime that we get to see. It is one of the most, in my mind, most beautiful harmonic convergence things that's happening, right? Two things are harmonizing. And so to me, the greatest opportunity going forward for humans is to recognize and embrace this harmony of the sacred and the science, right? Because to me, that is one of the most fruitful, helpful, serving tools and paths for us to go on that then reveals our unique hidden vibrational resonance, right? We're here to give birth our unique signature of vibration into this world, right? And so duality, we are birthing and giving, and we're also receiving the experiences the world is offering us. And as we're receiving those experiences that the world is offering us, that is also shaping, right, our frequency and revealing, right? That's the awesome interaction between us and the situations that we get to experience from birth to death, right? And so amazing way to look at all of this. Like I look at every life experience as just a magical breadcrumb that has led to the now, right? And so we get to go back and see what are some of those magical breadcrumbs. How did I get to this amazing space, right? So even if your current space and state isn't incredible, you're like, oh my God, it's not meant to be, right? And so, and there's just in the call earlier, where right now what I'm seeing is because the spiritual space, personal health space, personal growth space is recommending things like this. See the positive in it, right? And so again, a simple example that I use is if, you know, just on a call on this, which is you drop a pencil, right? Pencil hits the floor. And so the spiritual people are like, hey, that's positive, right? See the positive. And what ends up happening is as soon as you speak or think the word see the positive, right, because everything has opposites, you also spoke and put out into the universe a negative. In other words, if you put in 10 units of positive energy into thought, what comes with it is 10 units of negative energy, because this is welcome to duality, right? Where ultimately it wasn't positive or negative. You don't have to ride that pendulum. You don't have to use that entire reality and frame. You simply just go, a pencil drop. What does that mean to me, right? In my current life experience, what's the meaning I'm assigning to the pencil dropped? And what does that mean, and how does that serve me? And that's it. There is no positive or negative. And so what ends up happening, I see, is a lot of energy is being spent on positive, 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 and people are not seeing, because, you know, let's say in your last 5 years, you've produced 10,000 units of positive by seeing the positive, but technically you've also produced 10,000 units of negative. You're not seeing that. And what's happening right now with all the stuff that's happening, right, that people are experiencing, it's revealing the hidden. And so that negative energy is still there, right? And so it's just being surfaced, right? And so just be mindful that you get to choose a whole different frame beyond positive, negative, beyond right or wrong, beyond good and bad, the judgment words. You get to just go, it is, and what does it mean for me, right? And so these are some practices that you can put into your life, and I found that these practices tend to free up a lot of energy, subconscious energy, and it makes the process of manifesting that much more powerful, right? So I feel like a lot of people talk about how to manifest in that moment. What may not be, you know, shared is, well, what's the prep, right? How do we get you maximized and ready for that act and that practice, right? The other way to look at it is the things I spoke about here is like training, right? Pre-season training. With enough pre-season training, manifest things like the game. You can play the game well, but it may require some off-season or pre-season training in order to, you got to put it into practice, and it allows game time to be enjoyable and fun and fruitful and powerful and all that stuff. Okay, so again, hopefully that made sense. If there's any questions, go ahead and comment on the video. I'll come back and answer them. I know I kind of didn't want this to be like me just talking, but you know what, Valerie, thank you for the heart. That was great. Any other people, right? So I got to go and eat some food. If there's any comments, again, just type it in and I will come back and answer, and we can continue the discussion. Maybe I'll make another video. This was just a hot topic in, I work with people on a daily basis, and so this was the hot topic, so I figured I'd share this.